After Jesus and his disciples had their Last Supper, they went outside and they went for a walk about a mile and a half to the Mount of Olives. And there at the Mount of Olives, they came to a garden of Gethsemane. It was in that garden that Jesus told the disciples, "You stay here. I'm going to take Peter, James, and John. We're going to go for a little ways. You stay here." So the disciples stopped and they stayed. Peter, James, and John traveled on with him. They walked a bit. Don't know if they talked about anything, but they walked. The time came and Jesus said to Peter, James, and John, "You stay here now. You stay here. I'm going to go on a little further and I'm going to pray. You watch, though, and you pray while I'm gone. You watch and you pray." So Peter, James, and John stayed there as Jesus went on. Jesus went on, says about a stone's throw away. And as he did, it says his heart was overwhelmed with sorrow. He was grief-stricken. The thought of what he was about to face overwhelmed him. He was in sorrow and much pain. It tells us in Scripture that he fell on his face to the ground, and he began to pray, "Father, Father, if it is possible, please let this cup pass from me." Because Jesus saw what he was going to face. He saw what lies ahead. He knew the road that he was on. And yet he said, Father, not what I want, but what you want. John recounts that Jesus was so emotionally strained and he was so physically strained in that prayer time that he actually sweat drops of blood. We do know that there is a medical condition that is extremely rare that allows that to happen. But Jesus was overcome with the weight of the world and what he was about to face. And he contended and he fought and he wrestled in prayer. And yet at the end he said, "Father, not what I want, but what you want." And he got up from that time and he turned around and he went back to the disciples. And what he found when he got back to the disciples was disciples who had fallen asleep. And there he said to them, "Couldn't you watch with me but an hour? Couldn't you wait but an hour? Couldn't you watch?" And Scripture tells us that it was at that time he looked off into the distance. And what he saw in the distance was lights coming at him, torches that were afire, crowds of people. Jesus saw Judas leading the pack, and he knew his time had come. Judas had arranged a sign that when you see me kiss the guy, that's the guy you should arrest. That's the guy that you want. So Judas walked up to Jesus and gave him a kiss and said, "Rabbi." And Jesus looked straight at him in the eyes and said, "Friend, do what you've come to do." And it was at that moment the soldiers came, arrested Jesus, and took him to Caiaphas, the high priest.